Welcome to the Space for It with Makayla and Jacob. We are two therapists who navigate making space for what comes up as part of the human experience. Today, we are going to be talking about how to find a niche as a therapist.
Well, Jacob, is it niche or niche?
I will always say that it is niche because it just sounds so much better than niche.
Mm,
But I will say I did voice to text it to my computer this morning saying both niche and niche, and it knew that they were both the word niche. So I guess maybe it's both, but it should only be niche.
I agree. I don't really like the word that as niche.
How have you, as a therapist, landed on a niche?
I wouldn't say I have yet. And as I think about it, maybe I have a little bit. So, what comes up as you ask me that is I remember beginning the process of like building my business and starting my practice, and all of the advice given was to have a niche and advertise it, market it, and that'll help you get more clients because they'll know what they're looking for and what you provide. And I found it very difficult to figure out how to say what I want to be my niche, or even have enough experience at that time to know what I wanted to really work with. And as I've continued to think about it and ponder it over the last year and a half, it's come back around a little bit more for me to being my niche, I would say now, is working with people with childhood trauma, anxiety, and life transitions. So those are kind of three that aren't super specific other than childhood trauma. Maybe they are. I don't know. What do you think?
I think I think that how you described that at the beginning, where you said, I don't really have one, but I kind of do. I think that's a really common progression for therapists. Like I know that there are some therapists who go into the field saying like I want to work with people who are left-handed who live in this state and like they're just very specific. But I think for many therapists, and I would say I'm also in the same boat, you enter it and almost like wait for a niche to find you and just see what happens, see what trainings you end up going to. And I would argue that a lot of people start with the adjustment disorder, which would be like the childhood, not the childhood, the transition thing, and then move into things like childhood trauma.
I think you're so right. Unless you had an internship that really gave you a lot of different experiences where you could, and again, that would be like starting your practice, then of having all those different experiences where you can listen to how that felt for you and what grabbed your interest more, or what worked best with what how you come at therapy, how you approach it, your theory, or things that way. I feel like until you've had those experiences and been able to listen to those, what those are like, then I don't know how else you would know. And like you say though, there are some people who have that kind of more figured out, and maybe that's from their other experiences in life. Yeah.
I I tend to think that a big piece of how it ends up happening is also that people will just kind of see who do I work with that gives me energy.
Mm,
Because I know that when I started practicing, there was definitely a big part of me that was like, I'm going to work with teenagers. It's going to be awesome. And now I have worked with and I do work with teenagers, but I also know like that's definitely not the only thing I want to do. And even as I do that, that's probably not the clientele that I find the most energy with. As in like I experience it. I'm like, oh yeah, this is amazing. I love doing this. And so I think that looking for that piece is the other thing where as you work with people, as you get more experience in internships and then working after grad school, trying to pay attention to which clients do I get most excited about working with or which issues do I get most excited about working with.
yeah. I completely agree. And I think part of that for me comes from a perspective of really wanting to make this career sustainable, and hearing so much about burnout and just experiences of people leaving the field because it can be really exhausting or draining to sit with people if you're not sitting with those people who you find that energy in or find some joy and excitement about working with and helping.
Absolutely. Do you think that there's an amount of training or preparation you should have on a topic before you can officially call it a niche?
That's a great question. And what comes up for me is thinking about a specialty being different from a niche.
Mhm,
So, if you're to claim, in my opinion or understanding, I guess as it is, if you're to claim a specialty, you have to have more training. Be
mhm,
able to say, I'm certified in this, or I've gone extra hours. If you have a niche, there can be some crossover, I think. So say like me working with childhood trauma, if I'd never taken a trauma class or done any other like things that would expand on how to work with childhood trauma, then I could maybe still call it in my niche, but I don't know that I would want to go see someone who didn't have some extra training. So kind of both. What are your
I think that that clarification and distinction makes a lot of sense because the specialty is much more official. It's something that you would have listed. These are the trainings that I've done to make this my specialty versus the niche being like, this is what I like and I'm interested in. And it's much more of a almost just a thing that you can say. It doesn't necessarily mean anything.
It kind of is in a way. Again, I feel like people can be on, uh, any side of it where you could have a niche that that's how you market yourself, that's what you're interested, that's what brings you joy. You could also have a niche where you know that that's what a lot of people need, and you know that you're gonna be able to market yourself well in that area or to those people kind of thing, and so I think for me, it also depends on that, like, listening aspect. Where I'm coming from is I think there are many different ways that people come into counseling and many different ways people experiencing this, or experience this as just a job or as something more of a purpose, that goes deeper than that, and so for me, I feel it more aligns with a purpose and a lot of meaning for me. And almost a spiritual thing to be able to connect with people and help, walk through these journeys together. And so for me, having a niche and stating that feels more like I need to have that extra area of knowledge. It
Mm,
matters to me a little bit more that I market authentically, where
mm.
again, I'm feeling like it's not just the people who I know I could market to and there'd be a big audience, but it needs to feel authentic and aligned to who I feel I can help and with the skills I have.
That makes yeah, that makes perfect sense because you want to actually be able to offer the thing that you're saying you're offering. I think there's something really meaningful about being able to show up for a population in a certain way. Because when you especially the more experience you get, when you're able to pretty concretely know, "Oh, yeah, if you're working through this issue in your life, I can support you in that." That's not just really valuable for marketing, but that's really valuable for that population because then they can know, "I don't have to be alone in this, and there there is a map for how to work through it."
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah, and instead of having a general person who maybe has a I came across this the other day in one of the clinician groups I'm part of, where someone needed to refer a client with a specific issue and really wanted to cast, or put a couple screens to that to make sure that the people they're referring to have that more special training, that more, uh, specific lens or understanding for those clients so that they weren't just going to another person who might invalidate. their experience based on a cultural norm.
That's that's so important to be able to offer that. And this is kind of a tangent about those Facebook groups, but I feel like a lot of them, there are so many therapists who are just looking for clients that they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm an expert at everything." I, I I'm not going to invalidate anything this person says, when in reality that may not be true. And I think that's where, and this probably aligns more with the specialty idea, but that's where it's really nice when you can actually see or know, oh yeah, no, this person has actually had training in this. They're not just making this up. They're not just saying, oh yeah, I can do that because I need clients.
I agree, and I think it's beneficial for the more of us that do that. I think it's more beneficial for all of us because then we are getting more clients who give us energy, more people that we really want to work with. And I think overall, even though it would be could or would be a slower potential build to your practice,
Mhm.
um, in the long run, I don't think that that would be the case. I think you'd have
Mhm.
more people who'd want to come see you for that more specific issue and feel more comfortable and willing to do that. And I agree. I see some of that show up in those groups and people saying I'll take them on Sunday and Saturday or and awesome if that works for you and that's what you want in your practice. And it feels tough sometimes to be someone who is being more specific about it and feeling like I do need clients to be able to continue my practice. And I want to be sure of who I'm taking on I can help.
That ties into one of what I would argue is the biggest red flags you see among therapists, particularly in online listings, is that they will talk about, oh yeah, I can work with anything. I can work with any population. You look at their specialties and it will just be a list that's 100 items long. And that's not real. You cannot claim 100 things or even 30 or even I would argue 20 as your specialty. You can claim 5, maybe 10, but probably mostly 5 that are like, "Yeah, yes, this is something I've been trained in. This is something I have expertise with." And I think it's very interesting how the scarcity mindset, I think, comes into play. Because, like you said, when you're at the beginning of a practice, every cent counts. Every client makes a huge difference. And it's very tempting to want to be like, yes, I will take you. If you're breathing and human, I can work with you. Just sign here. And I think I think that does a disservice to the client. But I also think it kind of looks bad for the profession because it makes it seem like this very general thing, which in some cases it kind of can be because, yeah, if somebody is experiencing just a life change and they're maybe feeling a little depressed or anxious and that's what they're there for, that's great. Like almost any therapist can work with that. But when you get more specific, whether we're talking like any form of neurodivergency or any more specific like eating disorder, or OCD or narcissistic personality or bipolar or border, like the list goes on and on, where having more training is definitely kind of important.
Yeah. I hear that and how I've even and how I agree. And I noticed too when we started talking about the niche of taking all sorts of different clients so that you could find what
Mm,
that is. So where how do you feel like that plays into that?
mm. That is a fantastic question, and honestly, the way I handle that in my practice, because I post a lot of content on social media, I do have people who will come to see me because they've seen my content and they're like, "I like you seem very nice or approachable." And when someone comes to me with that statement, but then they have a specific topic that they wanna work through, and I'm like, "That's not my niche," I will say that. I will say, I don't have a lot of training in that. I am happy to try and support you. I will do my own learning about it, but just know that's not my niche, that's not my specialty. And I essentially hand them that and let it be their choice. Because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, beneath all of this, I would say no therapist should ever turn away somebody who needs services because it is the client's choice. Do they want to come see you or do they not? And if they're informed about what your training is, what you have to offer, and assuming you're not lying about any of that or misrepresenting yourself, like unless there's something that shows up in the actual process of therapy that's like, no, this doesn't work, I'm doing more harm than good, I think there's still value to be had.
Did you feel that in communi before you had a niche?
Mm.
How did you navigate that?
I'm juggling because I'm like, do I have a niche? I think I have a niche. I I was fortunate to have, in general, people coming with the same relative issues. Like I have done a lot of work with depression, a lot with anxiety, a lot with trauma, and then just the classic life changes, adjustments. And what I've had the most training in is I did a ton of formal training in trauma. And then I've had a ton of training in autism and then ADHD and then also dyslexia, which I should add, dyslexia is a funny one because technically trainings for mental health professionals about dyslexia basically don't exist. So I have done a ton of research on dyslexia and I'm dyslexic. And so there that I consider that kind of training because there isn't training about it and I'm working on making trainings for it, but that is a different topic. Point is, trying to stay on track here. The point is that when I first started, I didn't have a lot of people coming in with other more specific things. And so I didn't have a whole lot of the, well, I'm sorry, but that's not my thing. I think in more recent years, as my practice has grown and as I've basically been exposed to more clients, gained exposure to more clients, however that would be said, um, I've had more times where someone will come and say, "Hey, this is what I'm working through. Can you help with this?" And again, when that happens, I've gotten very comfortable just saying, as a therapist and a person, I can show up for you, but that's not my specialty. And I just maybe I'm forgetting, but I don't remember it happening that much when I started. And I would guess also, just to keep talking, I would guess also that that might have been rooted in where I was practicing when I first started, because I was in downtown Chicago in a much more privileged area with a very high like socioeconomic status like population. And so I think in general that was the population that was drawn to the practice that I worked in.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's kind of a lot of yes and in here where we can talk about being like it being really useful to have a niche and to be able to communicate this is what I like to work with or what I can work with, and you have a choice as a client too to work with me, even if that's not the case, I'll do my best kind of thing. And at the beginning, there's a little more circumstance, a little more openness to what comes through the door, whether it's being more curious of how do I like to work with these people? Do I like these kind of and more these issues kinds of things? So it sounds like it changes over time. Yeah, because I'm wondering, or I just noticing how it can be frustrating, I guess, in those online groups to see people just taking anyone. And I do think sometimes that happens. And there's also, as we've talked about this, there's also that space of being able to take. There's different intentions behind it, maybe being able to take all these people to be able to experience a lot of different things, so then maybe I can narrow down my niche and find what I work with best. And the other intention is more like just getting people in the door.
Mhm.
And both and that's where it kind of is interesting to me is like we are here to help and we need to make money. And there's kind of that weird crossover of I need to put food on the table and I want to do everything ethically and help my clients the best and help the people that I can help the most and the people I like working with. So it's messy, it's complex.
Very, very much so. And one of the things that what you said sparked in my mind that I forgot earlier is that when you're starting, you have supervision. And I actually, now that I've thought about it more, have a lot of specific memories of having a new client coming in and going and talking to my supervisor who had years more experience than I did and saying, "Hey, here's a new thing. What should I do with this?" And being able to get that input. And I think that's the other big piece of handling those situations when you're new is that you probably aren't doing it independently. And so you're not just working from your experience, you also are able to tap into the experience of other professionals who have a lot more experience than you do at that point.
I am continuing to work with a supervisor. Now I am working towards my big C, and I kind of think that at some level I want to work with a supervisor or mentor throughout my career. I don't know that I would want to not have that additional input or consulting. I message you all the time with questions of like, how do you handle this? Because there's so much complexity in this world and in humans just naturally. Again, how human of us to be complex creatures. And yeah, do we need to do that alone? I don't think it's always helpful.
Well, I think there's huge value in continuing consultation once you no longer fall under supervision because supervision has a very specific, I wrote a dissertation on supervision. It has a very specific context where the person who is your supervisor is legally responsible for what you do.
Mm,
And when you graduate from that, after the several thousand hours of supervised experience, yeah, having active participation in consultation is so important. Like, that's one of the reasons it's so valuable for therapists to be connected to other therapists professionally. Because, yeah, when you're working with people, you're going to encounter things where it's like, hmm, no idea. In being able to tap into or ask for support or resources from other people who may have experienced or worked with before, or even be connected to someone else who has, that's incredibly valuable. But I think the other thing that it does is that when any of us exist in a vacuum or on an island, it's very easy for us to start writing our own rules of reality. And that's a dangerous game to play when you're working with people on the intimate level that you do as a therapist. Because as much as so I think as much as therapists tend to have good intentions, there was a research study that was done years ago by two researchers named Ronstadt and Scoville, and they mapped out the progression that a therapist follows across their career in terms of how they think about themselves working with people. And at the beginning of therapist careers, very often they start out with this perception that I have the answers. I'm the one who can actually help people. And usually through my own lived experience, which is all very anecdotal, I can tell you how you should live your life. And that's a disaster. Like that is not a good thing. But it is where almost all of us start. And I think it's through supervision, it's through consultation that we can regularly be reminded, like, come back to what your training is, come back to what you're actually doing. Don't forget that as much as you're an integral part of the process as a therapist, you're not you don't have all of the answers. You don't have the magical cure that anyone is looking for.
yeah, we've talked about that before, because I felt that very much so. My first year practicing, being like, I feel like I need to know more, and there's so much pressure to that initial experience of feeling like you have to have all the answers, or that you need to be able to fix people's lives. And
Mhm,
it is funny how we fall into that tendency of the mind again to problem solve, to fix. And now we just have these different tools to do that
mhm,
and this different space to do it in. And over time, having that extra outside perspective and reminder to return to the training of people have the answers within themselves, and I'm part of the process is me helping guide them to those. And it does it does change how
Mhm,
you interact with people. And for me, the pressure falls away dramatically when I'm looking at it from that lens. And when I come into the space, I'm more present. I'm able to be more compassionate, able to be more curious. And all of those things have been way more helpful to my clients than me telling them, this is what I would do. or, um, so yeah, I think supervision and consultation and consistent practice of getting outside input so that we're not just going through the motions of what we're yeah, like you said, the reality with that we are creating.
mhm.
We have more input that is helpful.
I think all of this kind of comes together when you're developing a specialty or a niche or taking a niche and turning it into a specialty, because the more that you learn about a specific topic, I think the more you're able to see what is a person bringing into the session that I want to flourish, that I want to be able to draw out and say, look at what you're bringing. This is incredible. Look at these resources that you have. Look at the heart behind it. All of these different parts of the human experience that get brought to the session become so much more obvious when you know what to look for. And I think that's like, yes, a lot of different modalities have different approaches to this. I use narrative and person-centered primarily, which are both very like person-centered is humanistic, narrative is postmodern, both of which very much say, I want to draw out what you bring into the room. Like I don't want to imprint myself on you. I don't want to tell you the right way to be. I want to look at what you're bringing and like let's cause that to flourish. I think that the more you understand how to work with something, often the easier it is to see what you're looking for or to even just be noticing, oh yeah, here are the characteristics that are popping up. But I also think in almost every story, the important character is the person who's being healed, not the person who's healing. Like they're the main character, they're the hero, they're the ones who actually have to do the work. I think that the beauty of really developing a focus is understanding how to support people in actually doing that, how to support them in getting from where they are to where they want to go.
Yeah, I could see that in understanding, like, the more you see people in that realm, it's kind of like a jack of all trades or a master of one, a little bit, in a sense of like, if you're a generalist, do you have enough experience and specificity or reflection on each different kind of issue you're working with to be able to see those patterns and find those ways to invite people into healing or like I could see how for myself anyway, I guess I'll just do that because everyone is different and for myself I could see how that would split things enough where I'd be learning so much in either way that it would not be as much as if I was just focused on one or two or three kinds of things. I could learn a lot more about three things than I can learn and go more into depth in those areas than if I'm trying to learn about 10.
I think that brings up a really good point. Because yeah, the way that you learn and the amount that you learn will be different depending on how broad or specific your audience is. And I mean, I think there's value on both sides. I also think this is where in the conversation you could bring in the idea that there are so many commonalities in the human experience that make it so that yeah, when you're working with someone, regardless of what they're bringing, there are always going to be like there will always be this basket of things that fit the context. And there will always be doing things like normalizing, having compassion, actually validating and showing up and supporting that almost anyone who walks through the door would benefit from. And I think it's it's always interesting trying to figure out where to draw from when you're working with something specific, because a lot of those things are tools that generally work, But then also there are some other tools that you only know about if you've gone and done the homework, done the research. I mean, there's the classic, you can get a job done. It might take more time, it might not be done as perfectly, but you can get a job done without quite having the right tools. It's just a matter of, like, how fast, how well, how efficiently. Maybe you'll make more missteps if you don't. Maybe, like, there are all of these other factors. I mean, I would argue that probably almost every therapist at some point is somewhat of a generalist. Like, unless they very specifically are like, I only work with fill in the blank character, there are going to always be those general, like, yeah, these are the basic things that I see that I work with, and this is how.
Yeah, as you said that, I think about my theory of acceptance and commitment therapy, and how the way that it's set up does seem to fit with so many different presentations and issues because at the core of a lot of those things are the same problems, really. The these tendencies of our mind to get stuck in certain ways and those things as we work on can in any presentation or most any presentation can be helpful. And so there is that, and it's funny as I, like, think back to throughout the episode that we're talking here, feeling more concrete about certain things, and then also, like, picking that apart a little bit more and feeling like, "Okay, maybe it's not as concrete as that."
Mm.
Uh, so I kinda yeah, it's funny. I notice my mind wanting to have an answer, wanting to have it just be one thing, and having been a counselor for a little while now and thinking about it in those terms, maybe it's okay for it to be either way. Maybe
Mm.
it's more about how it's helpful to you or what it's costing you to have a niche or to not, um, and specific for each person than it is about one right way to do it.
I I love the gray. I would argue with almost everything, there's not one right way to do it. And I think it's great to contemplate. It's great to have conversation. It's great to kind of pick it apart and understand what does drive this? What is the rationale? What is the motivation? And the other piece, the other piece to this is that to a certain degree, if you're the therapist and you're working with someone, you have to believe in what you're doing. Because if you don't believe in it, if you're like, well, this should hopefully work, I think we'll see. That's not going to instill confidence. And it's going to be like a nocebo, which is the opposite of a placebo, where it will convince the person like this is not going to be beneficial. And and I think that's what's really interesting in the reality that there are so many different ways of supporting people and working with people. It doesn't as much matter which way you pick, so long as you pick one and you're confident in it and you choose to say yes, this is the route that we're taking and we're going to go this way and it should work, it will work, maybe will not should. And I think it's funny because yeah, there is that desire to offer something very concrete, but also when we're working with humans, there is never that guarantee. Like, no matter what operation we're doing, if we're talking surgery, any sort of medicine, any sort of therapy, there's the this should work based on previous history, based on all of the studies we've done before. This generally does work, but there are exceptions to everything. And so, as much as I think we want that guarantee of like, yes, here it goes, it fits in the box, we're good, that also doesn't totally exist in the realm of working with humans. But also, it does, but it doesn't. It's fine. It's clear.
More gray.
I love it. This is where I live.
I used to hate the gray, and now I appreciate it a lot more because I've become more able to accept it as part of the way the world is.
Mm.
And it allows me too to, again, not have to know or there not have to be a right way that I need to figure out. There's just a way that I'm going to try. And one of the things that's helped me so much in this space what you're talking about too is the perspective of let's try it on and with truly a like curious experimental lens of this has worked for many, many people. What I do and what I believe in and what's worked for me, I think could work for you.
Mhm.
And I don't know that. And that's why we need to really like give it a shot and try it on. And I think in a way that is helpful to have that bit of I don't know if I would say doubt, but a little bit of space of not knowing, not guaranteeing, because it invites that person in to like, I have a responsibility. I have some shared piece in this that I need to really try this on and see if it does work for me or not. And it takes away any, to me, any shame or hopelessness of things because it is just one way. And it's like, again, I think this can work for you. Let's try it on. If it doesn't, then there's so many other ways. And maybe that's just part of it too, that there is gray. And there's a beautiful piece of that. And we get stuck a lot of times in wanting it to be more concrete. So even I love even just having this conversation and as we're able to go back and forth in noticing these tendencies of our minds, being able to speak to that a little, going between the concrete and then the gray, and then wanting it to be concrete and understanding the gray, going back and forth so much and allowing that to be. We're not stuck to one way of thinking about it. We can have a thought that shows up as very concrete, and then we can have another thought that shows up as accepting and understanding of the concreteness or the desire for concreteness and moving back into acceptance of the gray.
There's so much value in being able to have those conversations. And then Albert Einstein would talk about how a scientist should be somebody who can have what they know and then get new information and then change what they know because of the new information and be open to actually adapting and in learning and growing and even throwing away things sometimes where it's like, oh yeah, I learned something new. That does not work. And there's so much value in that openness. And I think that's something that especially as you're developing a niche or maybe even turning a niche into a specialty, there's so much value in being open to paying attention to like what works, what doesn't, what input or wisdom do others have to offer, and how can I essentially be the vessel that creates the space for someone else to experience some healing through that or to get the tools that they need in order to heal through that. And I think at the end of the day, that's what so many of us as therapists want to do is we want to create the space for clients to be able to heal and grow because as part of the human experience being able to share in reality with others is so meaningful.
And yeah, and in that space of gray that where we can hold that, like you say, create the space and hold the acceptance for all these different ways that we feel as humans, that it creates this validation in and
Mhm.
of itself, in my experience, to be able to be held in how I am experiencing this or how my client is experiencing this. And being like, I notice a lot of conversation come up about like, I want to know if that's normal. And I don't know what is normal, Like there is a general
Mhm.
understanding of what is normal, or there's a thought about that. And how helpful is that? I feel like sometimes maybe it's helpful and a lot of times it's really not. And how do we open the space again? I love that this is the space for it, that we talk about that. When
I
is it helpful and when is it not?
I think a lot of the time the question people want to answer when they ask is it normal, the question they're really asking is am I weird? Is there something wrong with me? And I think the answer to that is pretty much always, in my opinion, going to be no. You're not broken. There's not something wrong with you. Like the experience of being human is so broad and we all are going to respond to that or adapt to it in different ways. And there's so much that we can learn from that, and there's so many ways that when we share in that, it supports all of us.
I would add too that maybe you are weird, and maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we're all weird. Being human's really weird.
That's fair. That is fair. That's fair.
And to your point of like, yeah, I there's not something wrong with you in that way. Maybe there's something different that you need to learn to navigate,
Mm.
that's going on in your mind or in your life or something that way. But yeah, we have these just consistent evaluative pieces to our life of right, wrong, good, bad. Yeah, things like that. And again, they sometimes can be useful and a lot of times they just create a lot more suffering.
I mean, there's so much there. I like this feels like a topic that could branch out into being almost any topic. And there's so much there in terms of creating space, whether we know how to create the space or we just have the general tools to create a space. There's so much there and there's so much value that can be shared through that. And I think that figuring out how to do that is always going to be a combination of experience, of training, of listening, of watching, of supervision, of consultation. All of these things that are part of the therapist world come together to support in actually making it so that therapists have what they need to create a space for people to heal and for people to grow.
I would agree. And I think there's that piece of intentionality that
Mm.
it comes up in a lot of those ways of continuing to be a lifelong learner, continuing to when you talk about supervision or training or reflection, we talked about listening to your experience with your clients, and that seems to underlie most of it is that intention of continuing to learn and grow. And I feel like as long as you kind of have that, then it's going to look different at all stages, and there's still on the path. We talked about a lot of different things today, and here we are in the space for it, bringing up different topics to explore, to bring our thoughts out on, to analyze our thoughts or reflect on them, and just go back and forth. So, thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you got something interesting out of it. I'd love to hear what you think, so feel free to comment or ask questions. And we hope to see you next time on the Space for It.